Hi everybody, it's Courtney and welcome back. Today's theme is vellum. So we're going to kind of use a little bit of vellum in our cards, kind of in I guess, a unique way. So for this first card, I am going to be using a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock and a piece of vellum, obviously. And I'm cutting my vellum just a little bit larger than what I need it to be. I'm going to be using the background stamp. This is the Outline Snowflake, I think it's called. I'll link it below. It's by Simon Says Stamp. I'm going to just squirt a little bit of the Tombow Mono Multi Glue on the back of my card panel there and just smear it around with my finger. Let that dry and it becomes repositionable. That way I can stamp it multiple times and I don't have to worry about it moving around in my MISTI. So I'm going to treat this with my anti-static tool and then ink up my stamp with Versamark ink. So I did stamp it twice. I probably didn't need to, but obviously because it's a clear ink, it's very hard to see whether I got a good impression on the entire panel or whether I didn't. So I did stamp it twice just to be sure. And then I can take that larger piece of the vellum, which, like I said before, is larger than what I need it to be, but I was going to use the magnet to kind of hold it in place because obviously I can't use glue on the back of it or else you'll see through it. So that wasn't going to work because the stamp is bigger than my card panel or the panel of vellum. So I ended up just taking a little bit of the Tombow Mono Multi Glue on the part that I plan on cutting off, and that seemed to work okay. So once again, I am going to treat this with my anti-static tool and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm trying to line this up in the same position as my cardstock was. So I'm just kind of using the grid on the MISTI itself to make sure that they're somewhat in the same place so that my pattern will be seamless once I lay these on top of one another. So once again, I stamped out the background stamp with the Versamark ink twice. And for these, I am going to be using the Gold Pearl Embossing Powder by Wow, which is, I have to say that it's one of my favorites. Between this and the holographic embossing powder by Ranger, I think these are my two favorites. This is definitely gold, but it's not a metallic gold. It's a pearl gold, which is hard to explain, and it's very hard to see on camera how pearlescent it really is. It is beautiful. So I sprinkled this onto both the cardstock and the vellum and heat set this. Now, you want to make sure that your heat gun is heated up as always, making sure that it's heated up for about 30 seconds or so before bringing it to the paper. This will minimize the amount of warping. But I just wanted to show you this. Normally, I don't show you the entire thing when it takes that long to melt the embossing powder. But you can see that it kind of is taking a little bit longer on cardstock, well, the normal amount of time, what we're used to, I guess you could say. And because this is an entire panel, you want to make sure that you're kind of moving your heat gun around to avoid that warping and avoid overheating the embossing powder. But it is taking a minute or two to get this entire panel completely heat set. Then I move on to the vellum, and it's like instant. So you want to make sure that you go very quickly with the vellum because it is very thin, even if it's heavyweight vellum. So you want to make sure that you're not overheating it and you're going to actually burn your paper or burn your embossing powder. So next, once that is done, I can go ahead and trim down my vellum piece to the right size, which is, this is an A2 size. So it's 5.5 by 4.25. And I'm just going to trim off that section that was kind of just left off hanging in the end on the right side. Next, I'm going to take a circle die. I'm going to line this up because I had one small area on the vellum piece that didn't really get a great impression and the embossing powder didn't stick. So I want to make sure that I'm not cutting out that area. So I'm going to end up flipping this around. It really doesn't matter if it's upside down or right side up because it's just a pattern. And once I have that lined up, I'm going to cut just my card panel. So just the cardstock with that circle die. Then I can take my card base and I want my circle to line up with my card base. So I'm going to lay my cardstock that we've already cut with a circle die over my card base. Make sure your card base is open because you don't want to cut all the way through it. And then I'm going to kind of just fit like a puzzle that circle die again. Then once again, run that through my Gemini so that way my circles completely line up with the card base as well as the card panel. So next we can stick everything together. I have some repositionable adhesive on the back of that panel, and once I ran that through my Gemini, it really wanted to stick. But I'm just going to use my wet glue here, and you want to make sure that you're putting adhesive not only on the edges, but around that opening, so around that circle. Going to lay that down onto my vellum piece. I did have just a smidge hanging off, so I must have not have measured correctly, but I could easily just trim that off without ruining the rest of the panel, just getting rid of that excess vellum that's hanging off there. And then I'm going to adhere this down to my card base, doing the same thing, making sure that I'm adding adhesive around the circle, but not on the vellum. You do not want to add any on the vellum. So when the card is open, you can kind of see through that vellum, but still be able to see the seamless pattern of the snowflakes. You see how the patterns just line up so it looks like one seamless pattern. Now for my sentiment, I'm going to bring back out the Winter Stamp and Die Set by Honeybee Stamps, which we used in, I think it was day 2 of the card series. And I'm going to be using the word die as well as the smallest shadow. It comes with 2 shadows. I'm just using the one. I'm going to cut both of them out of the white card stock, and I wanted to add some shine to the shadow piece. So I'm going to smudge my entire thing with the Versamark ink pad. Sprinkle on that same rose gold embossing powder. Now, it's hard to pick these up. You kind of have to hold it on the sides. Make sure that you're not using your nails because you'll just kind of smudge off the embossing powder. So cover that entire thing, and then I'm going to heat set that. Now, when you're covering a large area with embossing powder, it sometimes gets a little bit bumpy looking. You can get rid of that just by adding another layer. So once this has a couple of seconds to dry, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to kind of smush that ink pad directly onto this piece and sprinkle on some more of that embossing powder and heat set it. This will even it out. And in case I did kind of smudge off any areas with my finger when I tried to pick it up, this will smooth out that area as well. So once that has a couple of seconds to cool, which will take a little bit longer than usual, being we have 2 layers, then I can add my word to it. Once again, I am going to use the wet glue just because I feel like this gives me more time to work with it. I can't always line things up correctly the first time, and I don't really have all that much patience for that, so I'd rather just stick it down and kind of maneuver it around the way I need to with the wet glue. And don't forget about the I, the dot of the I. For word dies, I always seem to forget the apostrophes or the dot for the I's. I always tend to lose them, but this time and last time, I think I was successful last time with keeping that, so that I made sure to add that as well. So I'm going to, once this is together and has a couple of seconds to dry, because remember we're adhering this to an embossed panel, so it might take a couple seconds extra to dry. I'm going to adhere this down right over my circle, which is not really an opening because we have the vellum behind it, but I'm going to adhere that right down and then add a small sentiment strip underneath it. So I took the Winter Wishes, I believe I used. I treated some more white cardstock with my anti-static tool, sprinkled on that it's not rose gold, it's gold pearl embossing powder, heat set that, and then used my mini tonic trimmer to cut that down into a small strip. I like to sometimes, for my sentiment strips, cut one side straight and then the other end at kind of at an angle, just to add a little bit extra interest to the sentiment strip, so it's not just a plain rectangle. I popped that up with some foam tape directly over my large sentiment, and that is it. Actually, I did add some shimmer. I added some shimmer just to the card panel, so just to the cardstock, not the vellum, and the inside of all of these little snowflakes. And that is it for the first one. For the second card, we're going to be using some alcohol inks. So I have a piece of vellum here, and this is, it's 6 by 4 3/4. So it's a ½ inch larger than a A2 size. And that's just to leave room to tape this down. Because this is so thin, it's going to kind of curl up a little bit. I'm going to use a variety of different blues. I have like a teal color blue, and I do have one single alcohol pearl. or pearl. Is it alcohol pearl or pearl alcohol? Whatever, you guys know what I mean. I'm also using some of the blending solution as well, and I'm kind of just letting it do its thing. I did end up having to tape down the corners because they were really curling up as well, but I have that extra room because this is cut a little bit larger, so I'm not really too concerned about it. I did finish off with the alcohol pearl just to add a little bit of shimmer and then a little bit more of that blending solution, and then just let this dry. It does take a little bit longer to dry on the vellum. I don't think too much longer, but a little bit longer. So once it was completely dry, I am going to, you can see that it kind of gives it like an ocean look. I really like the way this one turned out. But now I can trim down 1/4 of an inch on all 4 sides, because remember it was a 1/2 inch larger, and I can get rid of those marks where the tape was. Now, if you remember, I think it was still in day 2, I used the pearlescent blue cardstock, and I'll link the shop below that I get this cardstock from. It is kind of expensive and it is very heavyweight. It's great if you're into like making invitations and kind of formal things. It's pricey, but I've had it forever and it's so, so pretty. So for this one, I'm going to be using the Merry Christmas stamp by Simon Says Stamp, and we're going to heat emboss both of these same way as we did for the first one. This I don't know where, do you guys ever like literally dream about a card design? I know that sounds pathetic because that's what my life has come to, but I literally was laying in bed. I don't even know if I was fully asleep or half asleep, but I thought of this card. So I had to try it. So this time I am going to be using some white embossing powder, but I am going to stamp this same way, treating it both panels with my anti-static tool, stamping this with Versamark and sprinkling on the white embossing powder and heat setting that. Now, when I heat set both of these, I realized that not only the T on the card stock, this is actually a card base, but the cardstock, not the vellum, didn't really get a great impression. And once I was all said and done, I realized that the little curvy lines from the H and the S on the bottom weren't totally heat set. So I will fix that in a minute. I'm actually going to fix that with a gel pen. I wiped off the anti-static tool powder, and that's when I realized I wiped off the embossing powder. So I'm just going to go in with a white gel pen and fill those areas in. You're never going to know the difference once this is dry. It looks identical to white embossing powder. So here was my idea, and I do like the way it turned out. Maybe not so much for a Christmas card, but it would be fun as kind of like a birthday card or any kind of other card. So I am going to take my card base. I'm going to open that up and I'm going to trim down from 1/4 of an inch from where it's scored, and then 1/4 of an inch down the entire thing. So I'm making little strips out of the front of the card, but I did leave just a little bit of a flap there, and it's only 1/4 of an inch. You could probably do this any measurements that you want. You can make larger stripes, you can make whatever you want. I just figured 1/4 of an inch works. No, I'm sorry, it's not 1/4 of an inch, it's a 1/2 inch, just because it will kind of even out all the way to the end. So for this little flap, I am going to add some adhesive to the inside of the flap. So it would be inside of the card. Then I can lay my vellum piece right snug against that score line and fold down that flap so that it becomes kind of one piece at this point. Then I'm going to take every other little strip. Mind you, you can make 2 of these at once if you kind of space it out right. So I'm going to skip this next one and move on to this. It would be like the 3rd section, I guess you could say. And I'm going to line that up directly with the embossed area on the vellum. So it looks still like a seamless image. All of my lines will line up. And I'm going to continue this all the way down the card. It's hard to explain, but it's probably just, it's pretty easy to see what I'm doing here. I'm just making sure that everything's lined up. And when I get to the bottom, I'm making sure that I have a strip of it on the very bottom, lined up with the very bottom part of the vellum. So that will give the card some stability because like I said, even heavyweight vellum is not really too heavy. So I need some stability with the card. I do have a little bit of warping, but I ended up putting this in under my MISTI for a little while I was editing the video, and it was perfectly fine. It lays perfectly flat. So it's hard to see on camera how much pearl and shine this has between the cardstock and the alcohol pearls, but I really like the way it turned out. It's different. It's not necessarily Christmassy, but it's nice for a winter card, I guess you could say. So that is it. That is the 2 cards that I came up with for today using vellum. Today I am collaborating with Tracy, who is also using vellum in her projects, and I will link her channel and her video below. So I highly recommend you check her out. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, and I will see you again tomorrow. Bye.